but give me 1 second. As was explained, I'm based here in hot and humid Singapore, where we've done a very good job containing this disease, but we are stuck here. The virus, we're stuck. We can't really leave either. So we're kind of like trapped in a 5-star hotel here, which I suppose could be worse. But I wanted to talk really quickly today. I wrote this book. I wrote this book in 2019, and they put a good look and feel to it of like a business travel book. If you open the inside of it, the tagline is, be a global road warrior. And it went through a traditional publishing house. And so once it gets locked in, you can't change anything. So this thing went live, I think, last summer in like July of 2020. And we couldn't put any tweaks to any of this, which I would have probably taken away the travel briefcase and put this guy in front of a Zoom camera or something. But regardless, you plug ahead and do what you can. The big idea of this book, and my focus, the big idea here is, and I, as an American, I've been over in Asia for about 15 years, helping Western companies expand into new markets, especially across Southeast Asia. I've seen companies make the same mistakes over and over again. And the thing that I found was that companies very quickly have gone global, organizations have gone global, but people have not. We are used to communicating and working in our own ways. And I found it absolutely fascinating, especially in the last really 20 years of companies going global so fast, is that you get this just immediate culture clash that happens. And especially in 2020, in that it happens at the click of a button, because now we're just doing these Zoom calls all across the planet day in and day out. I think I've been on calls with people from 10 countries today. And so you end up with all of these different insights happening all the time. What I was noticing is that even if you're a startup company, you're going into, a lot of startups are born global these days. So you might find that you've got customers in a number of countries right off the bat. Or you start growing into a new market like I did, and you end up showing up or managing a team in a different part of the world. There's an expression for these managers, because what they do is they show up either virtually or face-to-face. They make a giant mess. They flap around, make all this noise, and then eventually they get kicked out. And we refer to these types of foreign managers as seagulls. And seagulls are these big birds. They're often white. They fly in from seemingly out of nowhere. They make a ton of noise. They shit all over the place, and then they just fly away and disappear. And if you think about so many companies across, like from small companies all the way to the big ones, this happens all the time. And so I thought I'd write this book, trying to be lighthearted about it, with some not goofy stories, but some unusual, unexpected stories with some strange characters about people that caused a heck of a lot of trouble accidentally because of these misunderstandings and miscommunications, and how expensive it can be. So what I'm trying to do is to tell these stories so that we can figure out a way to shortcut. How do we consolidate this? And what I'm really focused on is global communication. The big golden rule that you've probably all heard of is you want to treat people the way you want to be treated. I want to reverse that and just say, you got to treat people the way they want to be treated. So if you are working for yourself, if you're a small business and you find that you're communicating with people that are fundamentally different than you, it's up to you to be able to define what that difference is, and then to be able to adjust. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful in a working environment. And so in the cross-cultural world, this is referred to as the platinum rule. Now, I talk about working styles. There's all of these different ways people actually approach work. And it turns out, if you've traveled and worked in different parts of the world, that they can vary considerably. And I'm moving forward on this quickly just because I've only got a few minutes here, but I'm talking about these invisible ideas, like how we communicate, how we lead teams, how we incentivize teams or people, how we build relationships. If you're trying to sell, if you're trying to do it remotely, how does that work? if you're managing people, if you're trying to innovate. I'm doing a ton of work with companies that are trying to go agile. And that's fine. Agile is a great idea, but it's a very specific concept, and it assumes certain working styles that don't exist in a majority of the planet. If you can measure this invisible stuff, you can start to manage it. So what I just want to do today very quickly is show you some of the data that's been done, some of the cross-cultural research. I think it's kind of a fun way to start thinking about this stuff. And I'll keep the chat tool open in case anybody has any comments, or you can agree or disagree, or you can be offended at this if you want. You're allowed to do any of this stuff, because some of this data is somewhat, I guess it could be perceived as controversial, because it is generalizing different groups of people. So you've got to be very careful with what I'm about to show you and how you interpret it. It's intended to be helpful and to just to understand different people in different parts of the world better. But I'll just give you that as my trigger warning. As an American, we're all triggered these days, so I have to be careful. But 2020 kind of changed everything, because now everybody's distributed. So you've got all of these cross-cultural problems that have been amplified because you don't have body language, you miss the informal interactions, you can't fly to another office to try and sort something out. I would love to write a second book on this line here, hierarchies have shattered. I think that is a really interesting idea. I go to bed every night thinking about this because I am a bit of a geek. Stress at home, children in my other room making noise, economic uncertainty. Yeah, it's always great to write a book and go broke. Social isolation, fine with that. Tons more. This has just been like a total mess of the last year or so. So this is what we're up against. And one of the things for the behavioral psychologists who are listening here today will know is that under pressure, we tend to become even more of some of the behaviors that we exhibit. And if anybody wants to agree or articulate that better, go feel free. But in other words, if you are a direct speaker, if you are somewhat comfortable with confrontation, under pressure, you tend to become more confrontational. You tend to become more direct. If you're the opposite happens. So how do teams deal with that? If now all of a sudden you've got a direct speaker and an indirect, a confrontational one, and somebody who avoids confrontation, under pressure, these problems become amplified. I'll read this question in a minute. Looks like there's a question here in a second.
Don't worry, actually, I should have held off sending that.
That's okay. Okay, we can if you want, if it's like relevant to here, go ahead and go for it. But we can. I'm a guy. I can't do two things at the same time. Measuring working styles. You may have seen some of this. This is a professor out of INSEAD, Erin Meyer. She's been around for a few years. She's taken a number of research projects that look at this invisible stuff. She and others have started to put a visual representation to what I'm talking about, how different parts of the world communicate. We're direct, we're indirect speakers. How we give feedback. We can be very direct about how we give feedback. We can be more indirect. How we lead teams, how we make decisions. All of this stuff varies considerably. And I'm gonna add more to this. I'm gonna overwhelm you with data for a second. Don't worry about the specifics. How we build relationships. Are we task-based? Are we relationship-based? I will tell you, as Americans, we love to be task-based. I don't even have to like you, but if you get the job done, it's fine. Let's just get it done. Other parts of the world are the complete opposite. You've got to have tons of time to get to know everybody before we do work. Confrontational, we've talked about that. Confrontation avoidance. Are we on time? Are we more flex? This stuff has been mapped for decades. And what you can do is actually pull data that looks at how countries fall along all of this stuff. And this is where it gets controversial because it's macro data. So I'll show you, here's the United States. This does not mean that every American is exactly like this. This is macro data. What it's suggesting is that Americans are very direct, but then we become indirect when we give negative feedback. The example I found this week was I'm doing a LinkedIn learning video. I think we have another movie star here today. So I will be a movie star next week or next month. They're going to film me to do a LinkedIn learning course on expanding overseas. The woman who's in charge of it at LinkedIn, she said my content was great, and she'd made a couple changes, but it's great. I didn't look at the changes until yesterday. She made a ton of changes. And this is a perfect example of like really soft, indirect negative feedback. She crapped all over my script, which is absolutely fine, but I've got a ton more work to do now. And she's like, oh, everything's great. And it's a very classic American moment where Americans tend to accidentally confuse people if you're not used to that difference between direct speaking and indirect feedback. Now you can look at the zigging and zagging and you can agree or disagree with this, but I thought I would just pull a couple of country examples. Here's the United Kingdom. Here's my adopted country here of Singapore. Of course, everyone's going, where's Israel? So I pulled some Israel data for us, and this is where the red dots here fall for Israel. According to the data, don't come after me for this. You can agree or disagree. You are indirect communicators, but you are probably the most direct at giving negative feedback. Probably based on any country on the planet, the data suggests that the Israelis are the most direct when it comes to giving negative feedback. And that you can see is correlated down here. Let me see if I have a pointer. If I'm going too fast, just forgive me, but you can see down here, you guys, yeah, here you go. Really direct negative feedback and confrontational, very comfortable with confrontation. That's how you solve problems. There's nothing wrong with any of these positions anywhere. It's just how things are done in certain parts of the world. Put everybody on Zoom and tell people to figure it out in real time. And quite frankly, that's where a lot of the problems start, right? So this is the stuff that I like focusing on and excuse me, and take a look at. I'll take a quick breath before I show you a couple more data sets, and then yeah, is it how things are done here? Yeah, it is. Yeah, right. It's how things are done here for sure. But look at Indonesia in this graph. I mean, it's almost like it's two different worlds. Look at Australia. Australia and the US are closely aligned. If you ever want to upset an Australian, you can tell them that their data is closely aligned to Americans. It always upsets them. Here's New Zealand. Somebody asked me for New Zealand data. So you can pull this based on about 80 countries. And what I'm doing is I'm working with groups who have cross-cultural teams, who have global teams, who are thinking about going into other parts of the world, who have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And this is a fun way to start, I think, visually showing the stuff that we're up against. I have one more slide for you. You may have seen this before. This is a document or some data looking at how some countries are emotionally expressive versus unemotionally expressive, top and bottom, confrontational, and avoiding confrontation. Israel, you can see up on the far left, when Israeli companies, I'm working with a few of them here in Singapore. Singapore, by the way, would be down in the bottom right-hand quadrant. So they would be, Singapore would be confrontational avoidance and emotionally unexpressive. These are opposites. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this, but you've got to know what you're getting yourself into, because it's very easy to misread situations. It's very easy to, under stress, become more of who you are. Emotionally expressive individuals tend to become more emotionally expressive or confrontational under pressure. The opposites do the opposite. It causes millions of dollars of mistakes, if not billions, when you're talking about large mergers and acquisitions that are global. So these are the things that I'm focused on. Again, I only have a couple minutes here, so I thought I would just really quickly show you this. I usually do that data spread over about a one-day workshop. I gave it to you in about 7 minutes. So if you are confused, that's quite all right. I'm happy to open it up to questions. I will send you a link. I've got some documents that if you want to take your own assessment to kind of find where you fall on this, let me know. Either email me or I'll send it off to everybody here. There's some other ideas I've got for you. But I don't, yeah, read the book. That's my advice. Read my book because it's fun. I tried to make it as kind of fun and story driven as possible, and not really prescriptive and a little bit unusual. It best goes with a cocktail after work. I kind of wrote it for people who I thought would be traveling on airplanes and didn't want to get into some heavy reading. So that was the intent of that. And with that, I will stop my talking and open it up to questions and go from there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Thank you so much, Kyle. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I thought it was great. Does anyone have any questions for Kyle?
That was amazing, Kyle. I really think we should connect. I think I absolutely need your book and I'm excited to read it. And I'm sure you've heard of her, but Osnat, Israel Business Culture, is a great book. If you haven't, it's just so good. For me coming here, I'm sure you've heard of it in all your research. And I do also want to tell you, I really think that our company as a general whole could help you. We're a publishing company as well. And we just had a #1 Amazon book. So let's definitely talk.
Absolutely.
In terms of questions, because I have had to figure it out myself on, being in Allah, being a new immigrant here, taking a 160-year-old company and being the founder of the Israeli division. And yes, I've been able to compare it to my colleagues in Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. There's some similarities of the survival attitude in terms of, connecting with prospects. But I wonder I pretty much overcome this objection, but I'm curious your thoughts on this. Sometimes people say, oh, Malka, I can definitely see how what you do would work in America, but it's a different market here in Israel. Mm-hmm. Now, unlike you, where one of our books is Navigate 2.0, Platinum Rule all the way, all about the 4 personalities. I don't know if you came across it in your research, but anyway, so I'd love a little reinforcement or from your research and stuff when people believe that a product they're deciding before they know what they're saying no to, because
100% agree.
Understand what you're talking about, and
So, and apologies for interrupting. Because I agree with you. I think that we are in a heightened state of almost anti-globalization from that standpoint. So when a foreign company comes in, the flags are up and almost the walls go up, which is okay.
Don't be made a friar. All that stuff.
Yeah, these seagulls flying in don't know what the heck they're doing here, and they don't understand our market. And I think that mindset is increasing in many different parts of the world. So it becomes a new challenge for companies to try and get over. And I think that
active to what you did, if people knew your research beforehand, then maybe they wouldn't be if they approach people the right way, if they read your book and approach people the right way in the first place, so that everything is kind of a ripple effect of people being more closed-minded to the fact that they didn't know what they were doing in the first place.
That's the thing, is that I talk about these 4 phases, and it's like the standard phases of learning, which is the first phase is that you just don't know what you don't know. So you kind of walk into this, and it's actually the seagull phase, which is you fly in and you do things the way you're used to doing it. The second phase is realizing that it's not working. And it's actually that moment where you realize, you go, wait a minute, things are done differently here. That guy said yes to me, but it means no. That I don't get that, but something's different here. The third stage is then, okay, what can I do about it? Which is really what the book focuses on. Then there's that 4th stage of mastery. And I kind of did a deep dive on one character who I think had done who had been close to becoming sort of like a master adapter across different cultural communication styles. To go back to your initial question, it's about getting them to overcome that. Quite frankly, and it depends on the region, but and it was mentioned in the chat, self-deprecation is a really good starting point to be able to diffuse that type of situation. As an American, as a tall white dude American, I've got to come in right off the bat and kind of, I do a joke down in Australia where I show a map of the world. So this is where we are. And actually, as an American, I'm very proud that I have a map to show you, because we've seen maps before. And so it's a little bit of that kind of, self-deprecation to be able to acknowledge that there are these stereotypes. And I go into them. I kind of have fun with it just to be able to acknowledge it, and then start winning them over that way. Rather than try and convince somebody that, we can do this. It's like, you've got to get them talking out what is their objection. Because I think you had suggested that already, which is that they're just saying this stuff because they think that's what they think, but there's no real meat to their pushback once you can get under that. But to me, like, a good sales skill is to get them talking more, so, have you had an experience where this didn't go well for when you worked for an international company? Tell me about it, and find out what is it that's eating away at them. And then you can at least start addressing that, rather than talking about how you're global, you've been around for 160 years, you're the greatest thing ever. Nobody wants to hear that, right?
Well, yeah, explicit versus implicit objection.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, very good question.
Any more questions? Awesome.
Question. Yeah, I just want to say that was very, very fascinating and very interesting, and I resonate with so much of it. So thank you. It was a great presentation.
No, you're welcome. I love the topic. I mean, it's just one of those things, I don't come from a writing background, but there was just this story right in front of my face that I felt had to be told. And I think for me, the big aha moment was, I'm not the only one going through this, and there's data. Data is a really good kind of that, especially in a business context, because people don't want to hear more just bitching, right? Like, nobody wants to be told, oh, you don't understand my market. That's not how things are done around here. Like, that's okay, but back it up with data. And what I just showed you very quickly is kind of a starting point with that. But it is a really good way, I think, that creates an intelligent adult conversation to start, to kind of get a better starting point from.
Realistically, though, most people don't track their data. I mean, I said it in my 60 seconds. I talk to people as a business coach, what are your goals? And people go, I don't know, do better than last year, or
I think that in the last 20
people track results. They don't track activities. How many people did you talk to, and how many turned into appointments, and how many turned into clients, and the length of the process? The
last 20 years, I think, has been, and maybe you could say it depends on how you define globalization and global growth, but I mean, it really has been it's been a hyper phase of globalization, and especially in the tech world, digitalization, any izations have been expanded very quickly, and so many markets have just continued to grow. The big guys out there, I won't name names, but you could look them up on their search groups, tools. They have made fortunes, but they've caused massive havoc in these markets. The markets are growing, but I will tell you, like, if they face a mega downturn, they're going to be in a lot of trouble, because they just kind of came in and just steamrolled everything over. And quite frankly, it was sort of a westernization of business rather than a globalization of business. And I think that that's starting to change, as there are more and more local competitors that are out there who are saying, look, we understand the market's better. We can do this cheaper, whatever it is that we can do. So I think the competition, the competitive world has greatly shifted. And I think that the people who are more aware of this and more, I guess I would call it a global intelligence, they're the ones who I think will be much more successful.
I'd just like to say thank you also. I agree with Elisheva. I find it fascinating, and COVID has kind of organically forced me to take my business online and do design virtually, which I never thought was possible. So I actually am working with people in Ireland and England, and I find it fascinating. So I really enjoyed today. Thank you.
Great. If anybody wants, I will offer this for the next couple of days, and I need to cap it because I have to pay for this myself. I can pull data maps based on any specific request. So in other words, if you want to see Israel, Ireland, UK, and the US, I can pull that for you, but I'd need you to email me that request in the next day or two. And I think I have access to about 80 countries. some of the smaller ones, one, I might not have, and two, sometimes the smaller countries are a little bit, the data's not as good, but
Do you mind putting your email in the chat?
sure can.
I'll send
I know
Cal's
that-
email to everybody. And Cal, could you also
Okay.
send me a link to your book and to the
Will
quiz
do.
you mentioned? Is that awesome? So I'll send that out to everyone as well. And with Cal's permission, I'll send out his email address as well, so you all have it as well.
We'll do that. My understanding, and I don't know if we're out of time, but so the book as of now is published through Hachette, which is one of the larger UK publishers. There's an ebook option, there's the hardcover, as well as the audiobook. And I'll tell one last story. Do I have Helena? Do I have time for a quick? So the book, they sold the audiobook rights. I had no say in any of this, and they hired a professional narrator to do it, and he's the guy who does like the Jack Reacher adventure books, because they kind of felt like it was like a business adventure story. So that sounded good to me. American guy, and it's a character-driven book with people from all over the world. So I'm listening to the intro, and he's doing like a pretty bad British accent. I'm going, this is interesting. Like, how is he going to handle a Singaporean accent? And how is he going to handle a Filipino and a Thai accent and an Australian? And the answer, it turns out, is poorly. The audiobook does, or it attempts accents, which in many ways goes completely against what I'm talking about, which is like, you have to be a little bit more culturally aware before you go and start doing this stuff. So there's a bit of a ironic twist to my audiobook, which I will just admit I had nothing to do with.
Good, I won't buy it then. If it isn't you reading it, what's the point?
I offered. I'm in some ways, I'm glad they said no, simply because I don't know how I would have handled it, because they would have wanted me to try accents. I wouldn't have done that. I don't think that's a good play. The narrator, you'd have to look at it. It's on Amazon and any other, because it was.
I know, I just checked Audible.
Yeah. I don't know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyle. That was fantastic. Kyle, I think you have a lovely speaking voice that I would have loved to have heard you.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, thank you so much.
I think they made